I have no idea what time it was. It was either very late or very early, depending on your perspective, I suppose. But I remember very clearly hearing footsteps above me. I reflected that I had thought Chris was clear his parents weren't home and no one was upstairs, but hearing the continued shuffling of someone moving around, I thought to myself, I guess he was wrong. Hello, boys and ghouls. Welcome to 3 Gigs, the podcast that tells the story of 3 gigs that define a performer's life and career. Their first show, their best show, and their worst show. I'm your host, Dominic Davi, and today we're not going to do any of that, because this episode is the 3 Gigs Halloween special, and I have a haunting tale of tour for you from my very own band, Tsunami Bomb. This episode is brought to you by Fresh Clean Tees. It's like a shave club, but they offer the most awesome t-shirts you're ever going to wear. Seriously, they look amazing and they feel even better. I love mine. To save 20% off your first shipment, go to freshcleantees.com and enter the coupon code GIG at the checkout. That's freshcleantees.com and use the offer code GIG. I want to tell you a story that is completely true. There were others who were there that might remember it better or even differently, but this is how I remember it, and I was there. Memory and time may have dulled some aspects of the story, and maybe a detail here or there might be wrong, but for the most part, this is the true story of what happened, at least to the best of my ability to recall. Back in 2001, Tsunami Bomb was on a full US tour with a band from San Diego called Counterfeit. They were super solid, and I liked both the music and the people involved in the band. I'm sad to say that I can't remember their music as well as I once might have, but I remember enjoying them every night. Tsunami Bomb never really matched completely well with any of the bands we toured with. Our sound was kind of a weird little hybrid. We had long given up the pretense of ever feeling like we fit in, and that's if we even had any to begin with. But we enjoyed touring with anyone who actually wanted to perform with us. And the tour had been a solid one. Both bands brought in a nice crowd each night. We were becoming increasingly far removed from our lean years, and things had begun to reach a comfortable state where the band could afford a hotel room and even a bit of per diem each day. And for us, that was a notable moment. You see, by this time, Tsunami Bomb had learned the hard way that some guys just couldn't handle the reality of a punk rock woman musician in their house, and had long since embraced hotel living. Seriously, perfectly normal guys. We would put on our shows on tour and invite us to their house to stay the night for free, and because they were cool, we would take them up on it. And that's where the awkwardness would then begin. It was always some variation on the theme. Sometimes it was manifesting as oddly long, intense stares at the 2 women in our band, like they couldn't believe these 2 punk goddesses had actually materialized in their house from the stage they had just been on. It was bizarre. Sometimes it would be this weird, creepy commentary directed at the girls. That would happen once we arrived at the house, suggestions of showering together to conserve water, offers to share a bed in the interest of economy, and the ever-favorite, "So, do you guys have boyfriends?" line of interrogation become all too common. And as the band became more known, it only got worse. So as a group, we decided to give up on per diems and just stay in hotels. It was safer and more comfortable that way anyway. So to have actually reached a point where the band could actually help us eat each day and pay for a hotel room? Well, as any touring musician would tell you, that actually makes you feel almost like a rock star. So during this US tour, we came to a town called Danville that was located just outside of Chicago, Illinois. We had played there before and been building up a strong all-ages presence in the town. And we actually played that town more often than we played Chicago proper. And the reason for this was a promoter by the name of Chris in the area who we had a great relationship with, and our booking agency worked with quite a bit. By virtue of being organized and consistent, he managed to pull shows out of Chicago and into his town of Danville, providing a great hall for shows and a great all-ages crowd. And this time was no different. Being our second or third show with Chris, we knew him pretty well, and we liked him, and the show went great. So when after the show he invited both bands to stay with him at his house that evening after the show, we actually agreed to go, which was unusual at that time. Because by then we knew Chris well enough to have his measure. He wasn't a creep, he was very polite, and he was very sincere, and it was a rare moment where we did feel comfortable, and with Counterfeit there, well, it was going to be like a slumber party. Plus, who doesn't mind saving money? So once the show ended and all the bands were loaded out, we piled into our respective vans and followed Chris through the twists and turns of Danville until we reached his nice but fairly nondescript house in a neighborhood that, at least that evening, appeared like it could have been anywhere in America. We were informed that Chris's parents were out of town, so we didn't need to worry about making too much noise. So we unload our bags and begin to follow Chris up the walk to the front door. As we got there, he took a sharp right into a smaller door that was on the side of the garage. Now this door led downstairs to a sizable basement that had been converted into a large living space, with a large bathroom and an even bigger, somewhat Spartan high school gym-style shower. There was a main living room area that we were all crashing in, with couches and plenty of rug space, and Chris had this bedroom on the far side of the basement. It was perfect. A shower is a shower after all, and as we all got settled, we began to enjoy our mellow little after party with all the musicians of both bands chatting away in little groups. I know this comes as a great disappointment to many promoters and fans, but traveling on the road is exhausting. Partying does happen, but mostly you're just grateful for a warm, comfortable place to sleep in a quiet room. Remember, this may be a one-night thing for you guys, but for those of us on the road, every night is a concert, and every day is a long drive. Every day is exhausting. You spend all day in a van, and then all night at a loud show. Almost every night, the possibility to get completely wasted and go nuts is presented to you, and as rock and roll as that is, one's body can only handle so much. A mellow after party is about all any of us could handle at that point in the tour. It was around this time that we were starting to take in our surroundings and realizing a long shelf that helped define the living area from the rest of the basement was stacked with nothing but toddler toys. Tons of them. It seemed like an odd thing to have in your apartment, so we asked Chris about it. And he replied that before the basement served as his personal living space, it was a preschool and daycare run by his mother, until she decided to stop teaching and closed it down. She couldn't bring herself to throw the toys away, so they stayed on the shelf where they remain to this day. Satisfied with that explanation, the somewhat creepy toys were promptly forgotten, and everyone returned to their drinks and late-night conversation. One by one, people began to fall asleep, and finally the last conversation faded out. A quiet settled over the room, and only the breathing of various bodies could be heard. I had long realized that I had suffered the curse of being the last one to fall asleep in my band, which, when you couple that with being second only to our drummer Gabe and waking up early, it can sometimes be kind of brutal on you. That night was no different, as I listened to music for a while on my headphones, and then finally laid in silence trying to relax. I have no idea what time it was, either very late or very, very early depending on your perspective, but I remember clearly hearing light footsteps above me. They walked around the room above, and I heard the distinct sound of a chair being slid out and someone sitting in it. And I reflected that I had thought Chris was clear that his parents weren't home, but hearing the continued shuffle of someone upstairs, I thought to myself, maybe he was wrong, and I hoped we hadn't disturbed them too much. I don't remember too much after that, since I finally drifted off to a deep and much-needed sleep. I probably wouldn't have thought too much of it myself, but the next morning as people were taking turns with the shower and packing up their things, it was brought up by a member of Counterfeit. "Hey Chris, thought you said that your parents weren't home." Our host paused at this, and while looking very confused, he turned to answer, "They aren't home. Why do you ask?" "Well, they're home now. I heard them come home last night." "What? What do you mean?" Chris seemed even more interested at this point. "Well, I heard them walking around upstairs." At this, Chris paused for a beat, and then he looked up. "Seriously? And then he asked hesitantly, "You heard footsteps upstairs?" "I did too," I jumped in. "I heard someone upstairs walking around and sitting down like at a table or something." Chris turned to me with a strange look in his eye. "You did too?" "Oh, I guess it must be Justin." It was my turn to pause here, and I realized the look in his eyes was evidence that something more was going on here. Like, who's Justin? What do you mean? At this, Chris lowered his head, and I remember looking at him thinking he looked so sad at the time. Pretty much everyone who wasn't in a shower or using the sink in the other room stopped and focused on Chris. He took a deep breath, and while slowly moving himself back and forth in a swivel chair, he began to tell his story. "Remember how I said my mom used to have a daycare and preschool down here? Well, she did. She loved doing it, and she was great at it. One of her kids was particularly important to her, well, to all of us really, and his name was Justin." He paused and took another deep breath here. I mention it because I remember that part really clearly. Justin was a little kid who lived around the corner from us, and he was one of my mom's first kids. She started taking care of him when he was just a baby, and when his parents had to go back to work. He pretty much grew up here in our house, and he was like a member of the family. He was such a cool little kid. Every morning he would come over super early as his mom dropped him off on her way to work, and he would be wearing his favorite red sweatshirt, walk into the kitchen and pour himself some cereal, and sit down at the table in the kitchen. He paused again and looked up, pointing. That's actually the kitchen right above us, by the way. It was his morning ritual. Then he would come down here with my mom and play with toys and hang out, and it would happen every day. I mean, he was like a member of our family. We loved that kid. Then one morning, he continued sadly, on the way here, his mom's car was struck by a garbage truck on the passenger side, right on the corner of the street. He was killed instantly, and I'll never forget it. His parents were shattered. My mom's heart was broken. We were all just in shock. We couldn't believe he was gone. She just didn't have the heart to do the daycare anymore after that. Justin was her favorite kid, one of the first. He was like one of us, and she just couldn't keep it going, so she closed down the school, and eventually I moved down here. Only, that's really not all. After that day, we started to hear noises around the house. We would see cereal on the counter. Drawers would be open. Utensils moved around. Justin's favorite chair would be pulled out as if he had just been sitting there. It was crazy. Honestly, I didn't know what to think, and my mom was convinced it's Justin. I guess it makes sense, right? I mean, this is where he spent most of his life. Why wouldn't he come here? His parents moved away after the accident, so where else would he go? It's just all so crazy to think about, and to have all of you hear footsteps in the kitchen is even crazier. I mean, it had to be him, because my parents really are gone. Nobody's there. Everyone was silent as we let that story sink in. It was just so heartbreaking, and it was so crazy. There was no doubt in my mind that I had heard footsteps and a chair or something like that being slid out right above me. And to find out others heard it too. And not only was there no one up there, but it was likely a little boy who had died in a car crash. I had experienced paranormal encounters before, but nothing so emotional and personal as this story. And before any of us could react to it or ask any questions, our guitarist at the time, Mike, walked in, having just taken a shower, and he was just joining us, fully dressed with dripping wet hair and carrying his shower effects. He seemed oblivious to the mood in the room, and when he saw Chris, he immediately addressed him. "Hey, Chris, you didn't mention you had a little brother." At this, Chris looked startled. He's like, "What? What do you mean, little brother?" "Yeah. He was sitting on the stairs just looking at everyone way early this morning," he replied as he put his stuff away, finally realizing we were all staring at him. "The little kid with the red sweatshirt. He was sitting right there on the steps for a while looking at us. I thought you said your family wasn't home." You've been listening to a hauntingly true tale from my personal experiences in the band Tsunami Bomb. I hope you enjoyed the story, and as I said, I told it as true as I could. No embellishments. That's really what happened that one evening in Illinois all those years ago. And I'll admit to you, after that, our guitarist was terrified that the child seen on the stairs was not Chris's younger brother, and he couldn't leave the house fast enough. The others seemed not to know what to make of it all, but to no surprise to any who know us, Oubliette and I were both delighted and fascinated by the experience. Now, I of course do have some other stories of my adventures with the paranormal, but I will save those for future Halloweens. In fact, if you've enjoyed this story and would like to hear more from myself and other guests in the future, let me know at 3gigspodcast.com or on my social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Just search 3 Gigs Podcast, you'll find me, and I'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying this show and you use iTunes, please take a moment to review and rate the show on the iTunes 3 Gigs Podcast page. It's a huge help to me and the show, and I do read every review, so I'd love to hear from you there too. If you'd like to hear more from my own band, Tsunami Bomb, please visit tsunamibomb.net for upcoming shows and new music coming soon. You can also find us on just about every social media platform by searching Tsunami Bomb, so check us out. Our theme music for today was the one song so far that I've sung in Tsunami Bomb, Cantare del Morte, the Halloween song, off of the Trust No One collection, out now on Kung Fu Records. And the piano music accompanying my story was My Dark Passenger, written and performed by Darren Curtis. My name is Dominic Davi, and this has been 3 Gigs. Thank you for listening. Take care, and happy Halloween.